Chapter 50 LBJ in Trouble. Lyndon Johnson was losing his dream of a great society, but he didn't know how to stop the war in Vietnam. He didn't seem able to admit that he had made a mistake. He had started with that fib about an attack in the Gulf of Tonkin, but one lie usually leads to another. President Johnson had said, "We are not going to send American boys 9 or 10,000 miles away from home to do what Asian boys ought to be doing for themselves." But he was already planning to do just that. He said all the bombing was aimed at military targets, but newspaper reporters told of houses, schools, and stores flattened by bombs. President Johnson kept saying that we were winning the war and it would soon be over. TV made people realize he wasn't telling the truth. For the first time in history, ordinary people could see exactly what war was like. The TV screen showed dead American soldiers and dead Vietnamese. At first, it was mostly students on college campuses who began demonstrating against the war. Then, more and more American people began to join them. Martin Luther King Jr. was now leading anti-war protests as well as civil rights marches. Ministers of many faiths were doing the same thing. The college protests began to get ugly and violent. Another big social change was happening in America, but most Americans seemed unaware. It was a long and massive migration of African Americans from south to north, from rural to urban. Farm mechanization, especially the invention of the mechanical cotton picker, forced many southern blacks to seek work elsewhere. Between 1910 and 1970, 6.5 million blacks moved from the south to the north. Of that number, 5 million moved after 1940. They moved to Chicago, New York, Detroit, and Los Angeles. Others, who didn't go north, moved to the South's urban centers: Atlanta, Norfolk, Little Rock, Memphis, and Houston. A people with a tradition and culture based on farming became city folk. By 1970, more than 3/4 of black Americans lived in cities. All those people were moving into cities that were already crowded. They were being squeezed into places that weren't prepared. They needed good schools. They needed opportunity. They needed all the things America does so well, and it wasn't happening. Black people themselves didn't quite understand what was going on. Most Americans thought segregation was a Southern problem. Its historical roots were Southern. It was the legacy of slavery. The Civil Rights Movement was something happening in the South, wasn't it? Why should anyone worry about racial problems in the North? They didn't exist, did they? Segregation in the North, urban ghettos, poor schools, poor jobs, the problems of the big cities? What problems? All those people packed into cities were like powder in a firecracker. And then the cities, especially those in the North, started exploding. America's cities had been neglected. In many ways, schools were terrible, transportation was terrible, crime made life frightening, and there weren't enough jobs for those who wanted to work. City people were fed up. President Johnson was trying to improve the cities, but not everyone was willing to wait for his programs to work. Things had been too bad for too long. In 1965, riots in the Watts section of Los Angeles lasted 6 days and left 34 dead. Newark, Chicago, Cleveland, and other cities erupted with riots of their own. America's cities were like volcanoes filled with frustration and pain. The riots may have eased the frustration, but they didn't do much to help the pain. A government-appointed commission warned, "Our nation is moving toward two societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal." Black protests began changing direction. New leaders appeared. Many were angry young people. They had no patience with nonviolence. The new leaders didn't talk about brotherhood and love. They talked of power, separation, and sometimes even hate. Black power voices were followed by brown power, or Mexican-American voices. These were people who wanted their full rights as citizens. So did the female half of the population. Women had been demanding equal pay for equal work and not getting it. Women's rights leaders joined the protest fray. Some were just angry, others had clear ideas and programs. By 1968, the country seemed to be coming apart. Conscience of the court. Thurgood Marshall was a lawyer who argued that segregation was wrong in the Brown versus the Board of Education, and won that Supreme Court case. Lyndon Johnson liked and respected him. They both were filled with energy, good humor, and a desire to make their world better. But when the president invited Marshall to the Oval Office in 1967, Marshall didn't have any idea why he'd be summoned. They chatted a bit, and then the president said, "You know something, Thurgood?" "No, sir," said Marshall. "What's that?" "I'm going to put you on the Supreme Court." Thurgood Marshall was to be the first black justice ever appointed to the highest court. He would be an independent-minded justice, a great justice, a justice one lawyer described as the conscience of the court.